The iron gates of the mountain closed behind him with a final, heavy echo, leaving Elian alone on the high, wind-swept ledges. The journey was not a short one. To reach the Great Lake, he had to navigate the stairway of clouds, a narrow, winding path of ancient stone that spiraled down the mountain's eastern face. For hours, the only sound was the rhythmic clack of his staff and the soft brush of his cloak against the rocks. Above him, the sky was a deep, velvet indigo, and below, the valley was hidden under a sea of rolling white mist. As he descended, the air began to change. The sharp, frozen bite of the mountain peaks slowly softened into a cool, damp breeze that smelled of pine needles and wet earth. He passed through the green belt, where the stunted mountain shrubs gave way to towering, ancient cedars. Here, the silence of the stone was replaced by the soft, rhythmic rustle of needles and the distant, muffled call of an owl. Elian walked steadily, his lantern casting long, gentle shadows that danced between the tree trunks. The path eventually leveled out, the ground turning from hard granite to soft, mossy soil that cushioned every step. He was no longer a guest of the dwarves. He was a traveler of the wilds again. The moon began to rise, casting a silver light over the path, and as the trees began to thin, the first scent of the lake reached him. A clean, watery fragrance that promised rest and mystery. He was exhausted, but the rhythm of the walk had become a meditation, a silent song of movement between the heights and the deep. By the time the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, the forest finally opened, and Elian reached the old shoreline. But the cerulean lake he had heard stories about was not there to meet him. Instead, he stood on a ridge of dry reeds, looking out over a vast, silent expanse of silver mud and glistening wet sand. The water had retreated so far that the center of the lake was miles away, hidden behind a curtain of low-hanging fog. He stepped down onto the lake bed. The ground was surprisingly firm, paved with layers of smooth silt and millions of tiny, sun-bleached shells that crunched softly under his boots, like powdered glass. Every step felt significant in this empty world. Without the weight of the water, the valley felt enormous, an amphitheater of silence under the watchful eye of the fading moon. Elian walked deeper into the basin. He passed massive, moss-covered boulders that had been underwater for centuries, now standing like ancient, abandoned monuments. He found schools of small, silver fish darting through the shallow tide pools left behind, their movements creating ripples that caught the golden light of his lantern. There was a strange magnetic pull coming from the center of the lake. The further he walked, the more the silence seemed to thrum with a low-frequency vibration, a sound felt in the chest rather than heard in the ears. It was the sound of a great weight being lifted. As the mist ahead began to glow with a faint, iridescent light, Elian realized he wasn't just walking on sand. He was walking through the history of the world, heading toward a secret that the water could no longer hide. The further Elian ventured into the dried heart of the lake, the more the world felt like a forgotten museum. Half buried in the silver silt, a gargantuan shape began to take form. As he drew closer, the ether light revealed a colossal hand made of white marble. Its fingers curled as if trying to catch a falling star. It was the remains of a lake guardian, a statue so ancient that even the dwarves had forgotten its name. Elian decided to rest here. He leaned his back against the cool, smooth stone of the statue's palm, which felt like a polished throne provided by the history of the earth itself. He set his lantern beside him, and the sea foam green light washed over the marble, revealing faint carvings of waves and moon cycles that seemed to pulse with quiet energy. The air was perfectly still. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the traveler and the distant, melodic tink-tink of small pebbles settling into the drying mud. This moment of stillness was a sanctuary. Elian watched as the mist danced in slow, lazy spirals around the statue's wrist, feeling the deep peace of a place that had been cradled by water for an eternity. After a long, quiet interval, Elian stood and adjusted his cloak. He looked toward the horizon, where the silver fog was at its thickest, as if responding to his gaze. A gentle breeze brushed past, momentarily parting the veil of mist. There, in the center of the great lake, the first spires of the sunken citadel appeared. They were not made of common stone, but of a material that looked like frozen moonlight. High and slender, the towers pierced the fog, their tips crowned with glowing pearls that pulsed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. They looked fragile, yet eternal, rising from the empty basin like a beautiful secret that had finally decided to breathe. The citadel was no longer a legend. It was a silent giant waiting for him in the heart of the silver haze. The walk toward the citadel was a journey through a corridor of silence. As Elian approached the base of the central spire, the ground changed from silt to a mosaic of polished sea glass, smooth and cool beneath his feet. Before him stood the great gates, two massive slabs of iridescent mother of pearl, towering so high they seemed to disappear into the silver haze above. But the gates had no handles and no keyholes. Instead, embedded in the ground before the entrance, was a circular basin filled with a thin layer of crystalline sand. Within the basin sat a series of delicate glass fins, arranged like the petals of a frozen lotus flower. Elian knelt beside the mechanism. He didn't speak. He simply adjusted the focusing lens of his ether light. He aimed a narrow, soft beam of emerald light directly into the heart of the glass petals. As the light hit the center, the mechanism began to wake. It wasn't a loud or jarring sound. It was a low, melodic hum, like the vibration of a wet finger circling the rim of a crystal glass. The glass fins began to rotate slowly, catching the light and splintering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across the surface of the pearl gates. In response to the light, the carvings on the gates, the ancient depictions of whales and swirling tides, began to glow with a soft, pulsing rhythm, a sound like a deep, distant sigh echoed through the stone. Slowly, with a graceful, weightless motion, the massive pearl slabs began to slide apart. There was no grinding of stone or screeching of metal. The gates moved with a fluid silence, as if they were floating on the very water that had once protected them. As the opening widened, a gentle, cool draft drifted out from the interior, carrying the scent of salt and ancient lilies. Elian stood, took a deep breath of the fresh, floral air, and stepped into the soft, blue-tinted twilight of the Citadel's hall. The gates remained open behind him, a silent invitation to a world where light was the only key. The interior of the Citadel was not made of dark corridors, but of vast, open spaces that felt as light as a summer breeze. As Elian stepped into the Hall of Reflections, his boots barely disturbed the thin veil of crystal-clear water that covered the silver floor. Each step created a soft, rhythmic ripple that traveled across the entire room, disappearing into the walls made of translucent opal. High above, there was no solid roof. Instead, a magical barrier held back the night air, acting like a massive magnifying lens directed at the heavens. The stars looked larger and brighter here, pulsing with a slow, hypnotic silver light. It felt as if Elian were walking on the surface of a star-filled pond, suspended between the earth and the infinite sky. In the center of the hall, a marvel of ancient sorcery awaited. Floating silently in the air was a massive sphere of liquid water, held perfectly in place by invisible threads of magic. This was the liquid star map. Within the floating globe, swirls of glowing blue mist represented the currents of the Great Lake, and tiny, sparkling crystals marked the positions of the stars above. Elian approached the sphere. the green light of his lantern reflecting off its surface. He noticed that the liquid was shifting, slowly flowing toward a single point at the very bottom of the map, a representation of the deepest trench of the lake. The water wasn't disappearing into the air. It was being pulled into a hidden chamber beneath the lake bed, as if the earth itself had opened its mouth to drink. He reached out a hand, his fingers stopping just an inch from the cool surface of the floating map. He felt a gentle vibration, a low hum that resonated with the heart shard in his pocket. The map was a guide, showing him the way to the source. As the stars above aligned with the crystals in the water, a path of light appeared on the floor, pointing toward a spiral staircase made of solid glass that descended into the silent depths of the citadel. The glass staircase spiraled downward like the inside of a massive frozen seashell. Each step Elian took was perfectly silent, the smooth surface of the stairs glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. As he descended deeper into the heart of the citadel, the air grew cooler and carried the gentle, rhythmic hum of the lake's secret pulse. The walls surrounding the staircase were made of a strange, translucent stone that acted like a canvas for his ether light. As the green glow of his lantern brushed against the surface, ancient carvings began to shimmer and move. It was a gallery of living memories, played out in silent shadows and golden light. He saw images of the water keepers, tall, graceful beings with robes that flowed like river currents. In the carvings, they stood around the great lake, using their hands to weave the sunlight into the water, keeping it pure and endless. Elian watched as the light from his lantern brought the scene to where the keepers hid a great treasure, the aquamarine soul, deep beneath the lake bed to protect it from a coming darkness. The further down he went, the more the images changed. He saw the water beginning to retreat, the keepers fading away, and the citadel falling into a long, silent sleep. It was a story of waiting, of a world holding its breath for the return of the light. The staircase seemed to go on forever, the spiral motion creating a sense of weightless drifting. Elian focused on the rhythm of his breathing, matching it to the slow pulse of the glowing walls. Finally, the glass steps ended, opening into a vast, domed chamber at the very foundation of the lake. The room was filled with a soft, sapphire twilight, and at its center lay a massive, circular pool that didn't hold water, but a swirling mist of pure, starlit energy. The source of the pull was here, and the silence of the chamber was as deep as the ocean itself. At the center of the sapphire chamber sat the silver seal, a massive stone disc carved with the likeness of a sleeping moon. But the moon was hidden under a thick layer of dark, oily silt and tangled black weeds that seemed to choke its light. This was why the lake was vanishing. The seal was gasping for air. Elian knelt before the disk. He set his ether light down, the green glow cutting through the blue twilight of the room. He reached out and brushed away the first layer of dark moss, his fingers trembling slightly. Then he began to speak. It wasn't a shout, but a soft, rhythmic murmur. The song of the first rain that his master had taught him on the very first day of his apprenticeship. Aqua Serenus Lumanis Tide. His voice was a low, melodic hum, blending perfectly with the vibration of the room. The words were ancient, tasting of salt and starlight. As he murmured the incantation, he began to polish the stone with the hem of his cloak. With every syllable, the green light from his lantern flowed into the seal. The dark weeds began to shrivel and turn into harmless silver dust, floating away like tiny fireflies. The more Elian whispered, the brighter the seal became. The moon carving on the disk began to glow with a brilliant, pearlescent light. Then he heard it. The most beautiful sound in the world. A deep, distant gurgle, like a thirsty garden finally receiving water. From the edges of the chamber, clear, sparkling water began to flow back in. It didn't rush or flood. It rose with a gentle, pulsing rhythm, filling the channels around the seal with a soft, musical splash. Elian continued his chant, his eyes closed, his voice becoming a part of the water's song. The great thirst of the lake was being quenched, and the heartbeat of the valley was returning to a steady, peaceful whole flow key. As the silver seal reached its full brightness, the crystalline water rose to Elian's waist, then to his chest. But there was no fear, no gasping for air. The water of the citadel was ancient and filled with the magic of the star-bearers. As it covered his head, Elian felt a strange, cool sensation, breathing light instead of air. He felt his boots leave the floor, the weight of his cloak, his staff, and even his own body seemed to dissolve. He was floating, suspended in a world of pure sapphire blue. The green light from his lantern caught thousands of tiny, glowing bubbles that rose around him like miniature stars, each one making a soft, melodic ping as it ascended. He began to glide upward, moving back through the center of the spiral staircase. He wasn't swimming. The current was carrying him, gentle and steady, like a leaf on a summer stream. As he drifted past the glass walls, the carvings of the water keepers seemed to wave in farewell, their shimmering forms blurred by the dancing water. The silence was even deeper here, a heavy, comforting quiet that muffled every thought. Elian watched as the light from the surface began to filter down in long, golden spears, piercing the blue depths and creating a net of shifting diamonds on the walls. He felt as though he were between two worlds, no longer bound by the earth, not yet reaching the sky. The ascent was slow and rhythmic. He saw the hall of liquid stars pass by. It was now completely submerged, glowing like a giant lantern beneath the lake. With every foot he rose, the water felt warmer, more welcoming. It was a journey of return, a peaceful drift back to the world above, carried by the free lake he had just healed. His eyes grew heavy as he watched the bubbles dance in his lantern's light, surrendered entirely to the gentle pull of the rising tide. Elian broke the surface of the lake, gasping softly in the sweet night air. As he waded back toward the shore, the water felt like silk against his skin, pushing him gently onto the soft sand he had walked across earlier. But the shore was no longer empty. Standing by the ancient guardian statue was a figure made of moonlight and swirling mist, the spirit of the Silver Lake. The spirit did not speak with words, but its voice echoed in Elian's mind, like the sound of a distant waterfall, soft and ancient. The world breathes again because of your light, star-bearer, the spirit whispered. But the balance is shifting elsewhere. The heat of the south is growing, and the sands are swallowing the memories of the old world. The spirit reached out a shimmering hand and touched the ether light. The green glow of the lantern swirled with a sudden dash of gold, then settled back to its familiar emerald hue, though now it held a warmer undertone. To find the city of infinite sands, the spirit continued, its voice like a gentle breeze. You must learn to walk where there is no path. Listen to the rhythm of the desert. The spirit began to hum, a low, resonant tone. Elian closed his eyes and repeated the melody, his voice barely more than a breath. Sands of time, breath of gold, hidden paths, now unfold. As he spoke the ancient spell, he felt a strange sensation in his feet. They became light, as if he could walk across a shifting dune without leaving a single footprint. This was the desert step, a magic that would allow him to navigate the treacherous moving sands of the south. He took a few careful steps along the shore, testing the new lightness, feeling the way his weight seemed to barely touch the ground. Go now, the spirit whispered as it faded into the mist, its voice growing softer, fainter. Search for the library buried beneath the heat. The sand remembers what the wind tries to erase. Elian stood alone on the shore, the new spell humming quietly in his heart, like a warm, glowing coal. He looked toward the south, where the air began to feel dry and carried the scent of distant spices and sun-baked earth. His journey through the water was over, but the great desert was calling, softly calling. As the first hint of dawn touched the peaks of the surrounding mountains, Elian turned his back on the silver lake. Behind him, the water was a perfect, unmoving mirror, reflecting a world that was now at peace. He took a final deep breath of the damp, cool air before setting his staff upon the path that led southward. The journey away from the valley was a slow transition of colors and scents. For a full day, he walked through the golden pass, where the lush green ferns began to dry, turning into brittle, amber stalks that whispered against his cloak. The sound of running streams grew fainter, until it was replaced by a profound, dry silence. The kind of silence that only exists where the sun is the master of the land. There were no birds singing here, only the occasional rhythmic scritch of a lizard darting across the parched earth, and the steady grounding thud of Elian's footsteps. He felt the magic of the desert step pulsing in his feet. He walked with an unnatural lightness, barely disturbing the dust of the road. As the sun began to set, painting the world in shades of burnt orange and deep copper, Elian reached the top of a low, rocky ridge. Ahead of him, the path didn't end, but the world seemed to stretch out into an endless, hazy horizon. He couldn't see the dunes yet. The great desert was still miles away, hidden behind the shimmering heat of the lowlands. But he could feel it. The air was heavy with the scent of sun-baked stone and ancient dust. He found a small, sheltered hollow between two red rocks to spend the night. As he wrapped his cloak around him and watched the last sliver of the moon rise, he knew the coolness of the water was now just a memory. The star-bearer closed his eyes, listening to the first dry whispers of the southern wind. The lake was behind him. The vast, unknown heat was waiting ahead. But for tonight, there was only the rhythm of his own breath, and the silent stars watching over a traveler between two worlds.